Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our Instagram Live with Dr. Timothy Shriver. I'm really excited and grateful that Tim can be with us today. He's a prominent voice and a champion for inclusion, and helps make the world a better place for people of all abilities. A bit about him before we begin. He's the chairman of the Special Olympics. Under him, the organization has grown from 1 million athletes to over 6 million in 193 countries around the world. He's the co-founder of Unite, which is a civic and social issues initiative. He's also a best-selling author, the founding force of the social and emotional learning movement, and a film producer. So thank you, Tim, so much for being with us today.
Sounds so impressive. All I do is just work most of the days, but thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being interested in these issues and joining us in so many ways, in the Special Olympics movement in particular.
Of course. And, so to begin with, amidst all the coverage that we've seen around COVID-19, one crucial aspect that's not been discussed is the impact the pandemic is having on people with special needs. That's intellectual and physical disabilities. And you obviously are very involved in the community. So I want to know from you, what have you heard about the key challenges they're facing during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, there's two hard-edged stories, honestly, coming out of this. The first is that I hear from so many of our athletes, isolation's nothing new to me. The whole world is talking about it, but I've had it all my life. And it's painful to hear. It's a story that reminds us how little we know of each other's lives, how many times we miss the reality, the hard reality that our brothers and sisters are living with every day. So in some ways, the rest of the world has gotten a little bit of a taste of what it feels like to be locked away. And I hope the second half of this is that we see the other hard-edged reality, which is when you're locked away, things are very hard. You don't get as good a health care. You don't feel as good about yourself. You don't build the kinds of friendships. You're not healthy. I mean, look at all of the efforts people have. My God, I'm isolated. I have to work out. I have to find a way to see the doctor. I can't get my hair cut. I can't meet my friends. I can't go out to dinner. That's life for the vast majority of people with intellectual disabilities. So we have to end it not just for us during COVID, but we have to end it after COVID. Because it results in profound inequalities, bad health, and really a broken culture and a broken heart, neither of which are acceptable. And the injustice is just unacceptable. So our movement is working very hard to find the voices who can help us change, for instance, the inequalities in the healthcare system, improve access to education and inclusive educational activities, because these are ways to actually promote justice. End discrimination. It looks like in Special Olympics we're playing, football, or we're playing basketball or bocce, but we're actually trying to end injustice. We're trying to heal these divisions. So it's been a very, in some ways, difficult time, but I hope a time of deep learning for not just for us in the Special Olympics movement, but for others as well.
Tim, you mentioned about the lack of inequality, and that's further amplified under the current situation. And, whether it's access to healthcare or the lack of hygienic facilities for people with disabilities. And you've also touched upon it in some of your writing. Could you elaborate about it a bit more for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah. Well, what people don't realize is that people with intellectual disabilities have been the victim of another ism. We know about racism, we know about sexism, we know about many of the ways in which our countries, our cultures, our histories are filled with division. We know about religious animosity, we know about gender-based and sexuality-based challenges to healing and understanding. Most people don't realize that another group that suffered greatly with this mindset that splits and separates. It's the human mindset, I guess, but we also have a human mindset that links and loves. And our movement's about trying to strengthen the mindset that links and loves and reduce the mindset that separates and stigmatizes. So people with intellectual disabilities, from the moment of birth, from the moment of diagnosis, end up on a track that's not healthy and not fair. Their moms, if they're not poor already, very frequently become poor. They often lose their jobs. They don't get good health care. In almost every country in the world, from the richest to the poorest, the care for the child with the intellectual disability is less good than the care for the normatively developing child. They don't get into schools. Most estimates are that 90% of children with intellectual disabilities never go to school. So it's so pervasive that people, I don't know how to say it. It's so pervasive that people don't even know it. It's kind of like the conversations we're having, at least in the United States now, about racism. It's so pervasive that people haven't even noticed it. It seems like normal, and shockingly, it is normal. So I hope, I don't say all this to accuse as much as to awaken, because in my own life, I think, the biases that I've carried, and I'm sure there's no question I still do carry, I always feel better. I always feel stronger. I always feel more hopeful when a bias is revealed to me and I can go, oh my gosh, I was harboring that. I didn't even see it. Now I can change. So the Special Olympics movement is very much centered not on blaming and shaming as much as on revealing and changing.
A lot of the, issues you've mentioned are systemic. And obviously it comes down to a government level. So what are some tangible steps do you think governments can take in light of COVID-19 to ensure that the needs of people with disabilities are met?
Well, you can start with healthcare systems need to healthcare training systems need to be changed so that people who go into training to become a healthcare professional learn about intellectual disability. And that's the full range, from people in frontline work and EMTs and those kinds of things to very sophisticated surgeons and specialists. They all need training. And most places don't either require it, and many don't even offer it. Governments can change the regulatory and the licensing requirements that would require that kind of change. Secondly, governments need to support women and children with intellectual disabilities with dedicated access to the kinds of early childhood supports that children need to optimize their development. Sometimes that's early childhood development, but sometimes it's just a special program to make sure a child gets vaccinated like every other child. So those are policy changes that are needed, dedicated attention, because otherwise the shame will keep that child out of the clinic, out of the vaccination opportunity, out of the system. Third, we need to promote inclusive education. I'm an educator, and you know what they say, when you see a problem, you resort to the one thing you know. And to me, so many of the problems in our countries and in our cultures and in the systems center on the absence of good educational opportunities for people. We need to learn how to include children with intellectual disabilities in culturally competent and in culturally relevant ways. We need to learn how to include their mothers, but we should not have schools that exclude children with intellectual disabilities. They just shouldn't exist, and we all need to change on this. This is not, again, I'm not pointing the finger at a country that's rich or poor or black or white. We all need to change on these things. So, and then of course, it's our deep belief that we need access to recreation and physical movement. The body has been neglected in the modern world. We think everything's in the head. If you're smart in this particular way, then you're good. And if you're anything else, it's kind of like, well, that's recreation, or that's just play, or that's just sports. No. The body is a central feature of growth and development. It's critical for the brain, but in its own right, we need to feel confident, comfortable, connected in our bodies. That's what sports does. That's what play does. It's not a nice to do, it's an essential. So we believe very deeply that sports opportunities for children with intellectual disabilities ought to begin at the moment of birth. Motor and fine motor activities and fine motor activities, play activities for moms and their children, right through the entire lifespan, right up until the moment of death. As long as you can be physically active, there should be opportunities to be physically active. So those are some steps: healthcare, education, recreation, early childhood development, of course, employment. I could go on and on these things: housing, transportation, law enforcement, practically every single system in government can be reformed and improved by paying attention to the needs of people with intellectual disabilities.
You know, at the Special Olympics last year, when we were there reporting, we saw that you guys were running a lot of medical camps. And for a lot of the children from developing countries, it was their first time, accessing proper healthcare facilities, and their first time meeting a doctor or getting the basic tests done, or even, just having fun and socializing. And so apart from the government, like, what can organizations, apart from the Special Olympics and the great work you do, what can smaller organizations and the community do to better support people with special needs?
Well, you mentioned the access to healthcare. I mean, I'm guessing some of your listeners will be shocked to hear that people came to a global event, and they traveled halfway around the world, many of them, and they're competing in great sporting activities, and they've never seen a dentist in their whole life, or they've never seen an eye doctor in their whole life, or they've never had shoes that fit them their whole life. They've never seen a physical therapist their whole life, even though they may have big challenges. So the first thing is just to recognize, if we can just all take a moment and say, wow, all of us have looked the other way when it comes to providing supports and welcome and integration and justice for this population. Second thing is, don't dwell on self-loathing. The point of revealing these things is not to make people hate themselves, it's to invite them to change. So, if you work for a company, let's say the company has 20 workers or 200 workers or 200,000 workers, call HR tomorrow and just ask, do we hire people with intellectual disabilities? If not, why not? And can we? Why don't we start? If you work in an education system, ask the leadership, what's our strategy for not educating children with special needs, integrating and educating in just and equal and inclusive settings? If we don't have one, let's develop one. How do we change? You may feel like, well, that's not for me. I'm just a small worker in the education system, or I'm just a teacher or a teacher's aide, or I just drive the bus, or I just help with cleaning. But still ask. Your voice is important. If you believe this, you can make a difference. All the changes in our field have been made by average people asking and challenging systems to change. So I can almost say that no matter where you are in life, if you're 12 years old and you're watching this, and you say, well, I can't do that. I don't work for a big company. I'm not a teacher. You know who is the only person who can make a 12-year-old with intellectual disabilities feel included? Is you. So if you're 12 or 6 or 14, you have an unrivaled power and gift to make another child who may right now be lonely, who may right now be at home, who may right now be alone, and feeling like they have no friends and they've never been asked to play. You, at the age of 8, are the only person who can change that. And so if you don't know someone, maybe ask your mother or your father or your friends or your neighbors, is there a child in our neighborhood? Is there a friend who could be coming to our school? Is there someone we could ask to play this afternoon in our soccer game, in our basketball court, in our backyard? And that invitation may be, this is not an exaggeration, may change a life. Just that one invitation. And the life of change may be yours, not just the child with intellectual disabilities.
So, the common theme that I'm seeing is that social distancing and self-isolation, while we're struggling with it so much, it's a very familiar concept to the physical and, the people with intellectual disabilities as well. And obviously inclusion is the way forward. And we're seeing some of that also, we're seeing some of the cracks in the education system right now as we move towards online learning. And I want to touch upon your background as an educator. In our reporting at Reset, we found that parents have said that their child with intellectual disabilities has a hard time concentrating with distance learning, or doesn't get the individualized support they need from their learning support assistant. What long-term impact do you think this pandemic will have on students with physical and intellectual disabilities, particularly those from lower income backgrounds?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to say, I think it will be very painful long-term impact. I I think all the things you've said are true. Most people, the bottom 20 or 30% of humanity doesn't have access to an iPhone, doesn't have access to an iPad, doesn't have access to a smartphone. So distance learning is a joke. I mean, there's no such thing as distance learning if you don't have, and many, many more don't have access to high quality internet or large bandwidths or the capacity to even afford those bandwidths, even if they exist. So as much as we can applaud and cheer for the digitization of learning, and it is important, and it will over time help us enormously, in the near term, the cost to families, and as you point out, a mom who's struggling to have her child maintain attention, maintain focus, the screen doesn't do it. You know, people need human contact. So it's very difficult. I think the thing we can do is what I'd like to call, if we want to avoid post-traumatic stress syndrome, we have to build now post-traumatic strength syndrome. And the strengths we need are the connections, the capacity to express. For those moms, for instance, the ones you're talking to, they need outlets. They need people to talk to them. They need actually practical solutions. They need to be heard. They need supports. They need to be told, hey, as soon as I can, I'm coming over. I want to take your child for the day and maybe I can teach them how to swim, or maybe I can teach her how to read, or maybe I can teach them how to ride a bike or recite a poem, or I'm with you on this. So they need to feel like their struggle is not theirs alone. That builds strength and resilience. They need to feel like when this is over, there will be people and resources that will come to them and help them catch up. Because there's no, I'm sorry to say, there's no shortcut to the fact that many people will fall behind, at least as compared to their peers. And they need to be told that's not their fault. You know, parents harbor enormous amounts of guilt. I'm sorry to say, I'm a parent, and I'm sure I made my parents feel guilty. But when you have a child with special needs, you're already behind the 8 ball. So many times you feel like, well, wait, what did I do wrong? I hear moms and dads say this to me all the time. I must have done something wrong. No, we need to remind each other, moms, dads, brothers and sisters, you've done nothing wrong. Your child is beautiful. You know, you should be so proud of your child. We value your child like any other child. Your child also is a child of God. No exceptions, no commas, no parentheses next to it, no dis in front. Child of God, no exceptions. So I think to build the strength that we all need to recover from this will be the only way we can reduce the trauma from having a long hold. And that's the best we can hope for, I'm sorry to say, for many of us today.
There's a lot of talk still about schools reopening in September. And how do you think the regular school experience will change as schools reopen, especially for those with physical disabilities?
I think it's very dangerous. Honestly, I don't know how. I've talked to many of my fellow educators, superintendents, school principals, leaders of universities. They all want to do the best they can to open. They want their students to come back. They want families to get the support that comes from being able to send your child to school. They want the economy to grow. But I'm very worried that anything resembling normalcy, until we have really widely available vaccines and treatments, are going to result in enormous pain and suffering, and the buckling again of the healthcare system, and great human tragedy. Our people are already vulnerable. I want them to go back to school bad, as badly as anybody does, but I don't want them to walk back into their deaths. So I think we've just got to take it very slowly, and I think we've just got to be patient with each other, and we've just got to do the best we can to balance. This is one of those moments in which humanity is called, each and every one of us, not to opt for an extreme. We want black and white solutions, grow the economy, improve health. And this moment we have to do balancing with great wisdom and great humility in the face of a killer disease, and with great hope and confidence in the face of our desire to be together. I wish I had a great solution. All I know is we have to take it easy and slowly and cautiously.
You've talked a lot about parental guilt, and that's obviously there, but there's also pressure and guilt for teachers who obviously love their students and want to do the best for them. So what can parents and educators do to better support each other and better support their child with disabilities during this time?
Yeah, I think we just all have to give each other a little bit of a break. If the test said you should be able to do, standard, let's say number 1 by the end of May, and you're not there, it's okay. Life is not all measured by the curricula we teachers are trained to teach. I think we have to recognize that content is a little less important right now than compassion. And I think parents get, like if they're not feeling they're getting their kids educated, they're not on task, they've fallen behind, they didn't complete the assignment. It's okay. It's okay. We'll catch up. We'll catch up. We're all living, and some people obviously much more than others, we're all living with enormous uncertainty and stress right now. It's taxing. Be gentle with each other. Be gentle with the teachers. They're trying. They're doing something they've never done before. They almost invariably, I can't think of a teacher I know who didn't go into the profession because they loved kids. They want to do best by your children, but they might not know how in this situation. Be gentle, a little gentle. I just think we all need a little bit of pressure taken out of the systems that surround us. And I think with a little bit of gentleness, we'll find the patterns, we'll find the right balance of keeping on task. I don't want to lower standards. I'm not about saying don't worry whether you learn or not, but there's a lot of ways to learn. And maybe right now the learning can be social and emotional and values and faith-based learning in some ways. And when I say faith, I mean in the biggest sense of the word. Learning how to have faith in the future, learning how to have faith in each other, learning how to have compassion for each other, empathy, have courage in the face of adversity. These are skills that don't necessarily come in the same format as some of the academic skills. We call them social and emotional learning skills, but they're really important right now.
And I know I have to let you go soon. So just one last thing before you go. Do you have any message? I know a lot of children right now are watching you, so and they're going through a hard time. So do you have any message for them that you'd like to tell them, and maybe how they can get involved in the Special Olympics movement as well?
Well, first of all, I'm gonna give a really silly message on purpose. Play as much as you can. Play all day long. Play unlocks the imagination. Play connects you to other people. Video games are okay, but play on your own. Draw, paint, build, read. There's so many millions of ways in which for thousands of years human beings have learned and grown and developed that aren't the ways we think you have to do it now. Give yourself some space. Play develops your brain, it develops your body, it develops your imagination, it develops a future that no one has yet imagined. It allows you to see something that maybe no one else can see. Play all summer long. If you have summer vacation, and you have maybe your mom or your dad isn't available, or there aren't adults who can tell you what to do, play. Have fun. I mean, it may sound trivial, but I think it's one of the most important pieces of advice we can give to each other and to our children. And to the teachers and moms and dads, I would just say have some compassion on yourselves. Your children will be fine if you're fine. The most important gift we can give our children, I think, is to have our own health, our own mental wellness, our own souls and spirits and hearts strong. That requires that we be a little bit more kind to each other and to ourselves sometimes than the world sometimes tells us to be. I think this is a time for compassion, both for ourselves and for others.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for
having me.